My friends, it's finally October and you know what that means. Ghosts, ghouls, goblins, kids having to wear jackets over their Halloween costumes because mom said it's too cold outside, candy, decorations, jump scares, and sweet skeleton shirts. This is one of my favorite times of the year next to Christmas, so this month Plaid Hobbies has two very special videos in store for you. So grab your pumpkin spice coffee, a warm sweater, and some candy corn that you always pretend is tasty but you don't actually like. Don't lie to me. Oh god, I haven't cleaned up here in a while. Let's just get rid of that. Ah, an aggressor squad. I've been looking at you on the store shelves for months now and I can finally add you to the army. But first, I need a knife to open it up. Just watch the box while I'm gone, alright? What? I told you to watch it! Well, this model does look pretty cool, and honestly, a little more fitting for Halloween. I think this will do just fine. Well, in that case, let's get this guy assembled then, shall we? This model was sculpted by the one and only Mezgike Miniatures. I've been a supporter of Mezgike for the past few years now, so I've been itching to paint one of his models on the channel. I've actually painted a lot of his models already in the past few years, particularly his faction, the Dredge. I'm also halfway through painting a few more of them off camera as we speak. His models and armies are all unique and come with tons of their own lore. These are all part of Mezgike's own universe that he's created, but you can also use them as proxies for other game systems if you want as well. But there's one special thing about this fella. This is the first of many models for his brand new release faction, the Fleshbound. Right now he has a single character unit out, which is the Doom Lord Incarnate, but he's got a ton more in the works, so I'm pumped to see the rest of the faction. Before we get into the lore though, I want to get this guy glued together. I got the seasonally appropriate coffee mug and got to work. I find that sometimes resin prints can be a bit of a pain to assemble since they're usually not as accurate as something like injected molded plastic would be. But this guy went together so easy I pretty much had zero issues with assembly. Well, except for this arm joint breaking. But that's just my stupidity more than anything else. This kit comes with multiple head and arm options, but I decided to go for these ones. I also decided to leave the head and the base separate for easier painting as well. To get started, I'm going to coat this guy with some Viejo Mecha Primer. I didn't really have a plan for a color scheme for this guy in advance, so I kinda just winged it as I went along. I started off with a base coat of a neutral grayish brown mixture. I usually work my way up from dark tones to bright tones as I find it's a bit easier than starting from bright, working my way back and down. I added a bit more light gray to my mixture as well to brighten it more, and then started doing a controlled zenithal highlight with that over everything. I mainly hit the spots on the model where the top light source would be lighting up. For the final coat, I used some age white to give the model its color. I think by this point I had pretty much locked in that I wanted to do a bone color scheme for this guy. I hold the opinion that reference images and inspiration are a crucial step to anything you want to work on. I find this especially true where, like me, you have really bad decision paralysis. In this case, I had a hard time thinking of a color scheme to do even after the airbrushing, so I decided to look back at the artists that inspire me. For this guy, I think I have the perfect artist to use for inspiration. Wayne Barlow is one of my favorite artists of all time. I originally knew him from his speculative biology book called Expedition, but some of my favorite artwork of his is from the book Inferno. This is an art book full of his illustrations depicting hell. There's lots of crazy abstract designs that I love from this book, but the colors are also what stand out to me a lot. It has a very warm palette with a lot of reds, pinks, and purples, all kind of washed down with a brown undertone. I think I'm going to use a similar color scheme for the Doom Lord. This image in particular is exactly what I want to use as inspiration. The bone colored armor was kind of my own choice before looking at the reference, but I'm going to use the purples and reds as a secondary color, with a slight bit of gold as an accent color as well. So with that decided, let's get painting. I set aside some colors that I thought would fit this color scheme and got started. First I wanted to finish off the bone armor. I started with a tan paint and dry brushed it all over the model. This was less of a highlight, more of a way to just quickly get that bone color down while still keeping it rough and textured. Since this is a dry brush, it also kept the lower areas darker, so it kept that definition. Next up was a lighter tan that I used more sparingly, this time as an actual edge highlight. I did this with a dry brush as well, being a bit more controlled with making sure it only hit the edges and the raised surfaces. There were a few high points that I wanted to add some harsher highlights to as well. With the same paint I used for the last dry brush, I used a regular brush just to add dots of tan color into the areas I wanted with a brighter highlight. I did this mainly on the highest peaks of the exposed bones and the crest on the head. I wanted to start working on some of the other colors, so I started picking out all of the horns as well as some of the decorative crests. These will be different colors in the end, but I wanted a brown undercoat for both to help match that unified color palette. I added brown to all the horns, the crest, and the armor trim. I decided to make the crest on the helmet a different color as well, so I applied the brown paint to that as well. I got started on highlighting the horns. I started with a lighter tan paint and started picking out all of the raised areas with a fine detail brush. Nothing too crazy, just roughly blocking in the areas where the light source would be hitting. I continued to do this to all of the areas I wanted to keep a brownish tan color. Once those were coated, I took a lighter tan paint and began adding in smaller highlights over all of the areas that I just covered. I decided to do this on the skull as well. I got highlights on the top of the skull, top of the nose ridge, as well as the cheekbones. Then finally I used the same paint to give a quick highlight to the helmet crest as well. Now that those were done, I went on to painting the gold. I find that if you want to do a more weathered grim gold, using a brown base coat is great for keeping it weathered. Instead of smooth highlights, I used my paintbrush to stipple on the gold onto the areas. This should help give it more texture as well as make it a bit less clean. I don't really think this guy's too worried about keeping his armor well kept. I kept roughly applying the gold while still making sure to leave a lot of the brown base coat showing through. I continued to do the same technique over the other parts I wanted to be gold, like the collarbone armor, the waist decoration, and the armor trim. I find metallics are kind of tricky to highlight. If you add white to them, it sort of just gets rid of the metallicness. So I find the best way to highlight true metallic metal is to just use the brighter metallic paint rather than color mixing. With this brighter gold, I started to pick out any of the raised surfaces on the trim and all the decorations, as well as the edges. You can already see the definition start to pop out. Now that I have all the gold done, let's get started on the reddish purple colors. I think the cape also being this color will help it stand out a lot. I gave it a watery base coat with a purplish red color, making sure to give it 2 thin coats. I decided to add this color to a few other parts in the model as well. I added it to the inside of the neck area, the waist cape, and the front of the axe. Once the base coat had dried, I decided to highlight it using a dry brush. Instead of the usual dry brushing techniques, I stippled the highlights on just on the top areas of the cape. With the shape of the dry brush as well as the pressure that I'm applying, it should add a nice texture to the cape. After that, I mixed in some purple and red together to create a brighter purple highlight. I did the same stippling technique with that. Finally, for a nice vibrant final highlight, I used some of the white mixed with purple, and with a smaller dry brush I stippled it just on the most exposed and raised areas of the cape. Just for that added bit of definition, I used that same mixture with a detail brush and ran it along the edges of the cape, as well as picking out any of the stitch marks on it. This just helped them pop out a little bit more. With the brush, I added the same highlights to all of the other areas that had the same purple base coat. I wanted to add a bit of a darker red to the scheme as well, so I added it to some of the smaller areas. This finished off the bird, the axe handle, and the crest on his helmet. Once that coat dried, I highlighted it up to a brighter red using my dry brush. This really showed through well on the birds, the feathers all popped out really well after the dry brush. Then, with a detail brush and the brightest red that I have, I roughly painted in some final highlights to all of the red areas. I decided to glue down his head now before continuing, just to make painting a little more easier. For the final bit of highlighting, I added some of the off-white to my red and did one final pass of highlights on just the areas that I just did. After that, I sprayed him with a semi-gloss varnish and got ready to make him dirty. For the last few videos that I've done, I've had a lot of fun using different colors of enamels and applying them with a brush rather than an airbrush. I figured this guy would be a great testing ground to see what other colors I can work with. I picked up some of these Tamiya enamel paints that I could test out on this guy. I've only ever used Tamiya's acrylics, so I'm excited to see how these work out. I poured some out into a cup and added some enamel thinner to thin it down to a wash consistency. Once I got the consistency right, I used an old brush to apply it to all of the bone parts of the armor. I wanted this to really sink into the gaps of the bone as well as to tint the surface slightly red, just to give that impression that these aren't just dry bones, these are still gross and white and covered in fluid. So far, I was really impressed with the Tamiya enamels. It's nice using enamel paints that are also really vibrant as well, rather than just the usual weathering dark enamels. I also somehow got paint all over my hands while doing this without realizing, so I washed up and then continued. Once the red had settled for a bit, I grabbed a Q-tip with some mineral spirits and started removing the enamels away just from the areas that I didn't want them to be. I used the Q-tip almost like a dry brush. I just gave it some quick passes just over the highest raised areas, keeping the red wash in the gaps and the crevices. So far, the red wash was really helping unify the color scheme. I can't wait to try out more of these Tamiya enamels in the future. To keep the darker brown tone on all of the horns, I used some AK Interactive track wash on them. I applied it roughly all over the horns and the spikes, making sure not to let it spill over onto the rest of the model. Once it had dried, I'd lightly dabbed it away with a Q-tip and some mineral spirits again. Taking a step back to look at it so far, I'm really happy with how it's turning out. I wasn't really sure what color wash I wanted to use for the cape and the purple parts, so I tried out the sea blue wash from Ammo. It wasn't too bad. I think over a lighter color this would look a lot better. It looks a bit too subtle on the cape, but honestly I think it still works decently. Then finally I added a dark rusty colored wash to all the gold parts. This really helped unify the gold with the brown base coat that we did underneath earlier. I'm always so impressed at how easy it is to use these enamels to make your models look all grim and weathered. I think it helps with the dry very matte and dark. Even the red wash that we used earlier dried a lot darker than it looked out of the pot. Once all the enamels were dried, I got ready to move on to the base. I wasn't sure this entire time what to do for the base, and even now I'm still a little bit unsure, so let's wing it. Let's go for a Magma base. For one-off projects like this, I always try to do a basing scheme that I've never really done before. There's only so many models and paint schemes you'll do in your life, so I always try to do new things like this so I can give everything a try. After giving everything a light dry brush with some gray, I prepped the Magma areas by painting it with some white. This will be a great undercoat for all of the Magma colors that we're going to apply next. Before applying any other colors, I used some white through my airbrush to help cover up the white that I just hand painted, and leave some overspray onto the rocky areas to simulate that glow. I started with a light yellow paint coating all of the white that we just put down. I wasn't too concerned with any overspray on the rocks since that'll just only help with the glow effects. Next was an orange tone that I applied over the yellow, followed by a red ink as well. All of these undercoats should help bring each following layer up in brightness and saturation. Once I got the red down, I went back to my orange paint and very carefully airbrushed it between where the rocks and the magma meet, giving it a lighter glow around these areas since this would be a little shallower. There wasn't much surface area to work with, so I had to be extra careful not to overspray with this. Finally, I used some red fluorescent paint all over the magma. Fluorescent paints tend to be a bit more transparent, so overspraying it onto the layers I just put shouldn't cover them all up. I wanted to add some glow underneath the Doomlord as well, so I glued him down to the base before doing that. I used the same red inks from earlier and gave him some puffs of it through the airbrush, only coming from underneath. He was really starting to look like he was in the environment that I painted. Last thing on the base that I wanted to do was paint the floating rocks and pebbles with a dark gray color, since the top of these wouldn't be getting much light shining on them. Finally, we have one last trick to make this guy look extra spooky. Yoo-hoo glue. I haven't used this on the channel yet, but I've used this before in my own miniatures. It's a great way to add slime, goo, and just stringy gross bits to your models. This glue is really stringy and stretchy, so you can really pull it and let it stretch before it dries. It also holds its shape pretty well, so it's great for these effects. I applied this all to the ends of his axe and the claws as well, making sure to really pull and tug at it and add strings hanging between each finger. With a brush, I also applied it to the ribs and the bones on his power pack. This will make them look really gross and wet and slimy. The red wash we did underneath that will also help add to this effect. Once that dried, I used some classic blood for the blood god and started dabbing it all over the goo on the weapons. This will make it look like strings of blood and gore, and really add to that grimdark look we're going for. Yoo-hoo glue and blood for the blood god is honestly such a great combination for realistic and dynamic blood on your miniatures. I also applied this a bit to the chest and the back as well, just to really add to that wet, gross look on the ribs. I finally painted the base rims black, and I called it a day.
In the aeons before time, a wound was torn in the veil between the material and the immaterial universes. Through it pressed a race of demons. Without form, their souls scattering like the smoke in the wind. They could not exist in the material universe, not as they were. So, from the mystic ore of the veil, they wrought the Kavzul, metallic orbs, each imbued with a fragment of their soul code. Such were the Kavzul, sealed hearts of the immaterial, bound now to enter and endure the material universe. When the Kavzul fell through the veil, the event was cataclysm. They scattered across the stars, lost and buried until chance uncoverings birthed terror and worship. Mortal cults formed around them, and from these arose the Libra, priests, sages, heretics, engineers of the dark intent. They communed with the Kavzul, learned their hungers, and so built forges on the cursed worlds of Ocean 9.
Man, I always underestimate how fun some of these one-off projects can be. I feel like I've really started to level up with my enamel weathering game from this model as well. He was also just a blast to paint. Mezgike's models are great, so definitely go show him some love. I'll put his shop links in the description below. I'm pumped to see what else he has planned for the Fleshbound. They're off to a great start with this model, so I can't wait to see what a full army of these guys would look like. Painting a model like this was also perfect for getting me into the Halloween spirit, so I hope this video gets you guys all into the Halloween spirit as well. Now that we got this fella done, our first Halloween special is over. But that's not all. We have one more special spooky themed episode in store for you guys at the end of the month. So stay tuned for that. It's gonna be a fun one if you like Age of Sigmar. And with that, this has been Plaid Hobbies. Thank you for watching, have a spooky night, and I'll see you in the... What? What just happened? Oh god, oh god!
And now, folks, we thank you for joining us tonight. We hope your evening was filled with spooky entertainment, and that you happily sleep through the night and join us again tomorrow. Good night, and happy Halloween.